Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. A few days ago, we did a show with the political philosopher Laura Field about the intelligence of MAGA intellectuals, the MAGA intelligentsia. Some people might think that's somewhat of a contradiction in terms, but we talked about the professors and the philosophers, or indeed the trolls, who have transformed rage into a winning, successful political movement. She has a new book out, Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. And one of the things that came out of the conversation is whatever one thinks of characters like Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance, and certainly some of the trolls on the internet like Bronze Age Pervert, one thing seems true, that in terms of this endless debate, battle between left and right, between liberals and conservatives, at the moment it seems to be the conservatives who have the upper hand, at least in terms of the ears and eyes of younger Americans. So one of the great questions we seem to address continually in this show is, how can the left reinvent themselves and be able to take on the 21st century conservatives? That's a question, I think, that's addressed in a new book by Alex Zakaras. He's a professor in Burlington, Vermont, at the University of Vermont. He has a new book out, Freedom for All, What a Liberal Society Could Be, and he's joining us from Burlington. Alex, I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to see Field's new book. I mean, she's a progressive in her own right, but do you agree with her thesis that somehow the furiousness of minds on the right is currently winning at least the PR battle?
Let me start by saying thanks so much, Andrew, for having me on the show. Yeah, I mean, I worry about this. I mean, it's certainly true that intellectuals on the right are emboldened right now, that their ideas have gained wider currency in the last decade than they have at any other time in my lifetime, for sure. And that they seem to have found some purchase among, as you say, younger Americans in this moment. So I think it's especially important at this time for defenders of liberalism to step forward and offer a kind of bold and ambitious defense of liberal institutions. And you know, one of the things that I worry about when it comes to the tenor of sort of defenses of liberalism that are offered in our time is that they tend to be quite defensive, right? And for understandable reasons. We're living through extraordinary assaults on the fundamental liberal institutions that have sort of anchored our political order for generations: the rule of law, the independent judiciary, checks and balances, basic First Amendment rights, among other things, attacked under this administration. And so it makes sense in a certain way for liberals to be focused on playing defense, on trying to shore up and protect our institutions against these assaults. But one of the things I worry about is that, as important as it is not enough in this moment, because the risk is that it positions the populist right as the sort of agents of change and liberals as defenders of the status quo, or at least the pre-Trump status quo. And I think that's something we just can't afford right now, right? We need to...
I take your point, Alex, but you say we can't afford. I'm not sure who exactly we are, but isn't that just a statement of truth? It's one of the odd things about the left, or the supposed left and right in America, or liberals and conservatives, that the we, and I'm not suggesting you're necessarily part of it, but the dominant elite in America, I mean, elites are always dominant, of course, are the people in the university and scientists, state bureaucrats, lawyers, the very people who the MAGA movement seem to be, for better or worse, declaring war on. So might one issue be that the reason why, quote unquote, liberals are so conservative these days in America is because that's in their material interest to defend an old world?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, liberalism, and maybe we should step back for a minute and talk about what we mean when we use this term.
Yeah, because and I even have a slide for this show from Wikipedia on liberalism. Of course, it's a very slippery term, a term that some conservatives even claim. So we need to define our terms.
Yeah. So and part of the confusion, as I think you've noted before on your show, is that in colloquial discourse, we use the term liberal to describe people who are politically left. On the other hand, when political scientists and historians use the term, they're talking about a distinct tradition of ideas, a distinct political persuasion or outlook. And I would say, look, it's defined by, on the one hand, a shared goal, on the other hand, a shared set of strategies. The shared goal is freedom. Liberals have always tried to create conditions under which people can live freely. And they valued personal freedoms above all, like freedom of worship, freedom of speech and association, freedom to love who you want to love, freedom to work, etc. And then liberals are united by a shared set of strategies, which include constitutions and individual rights, independent judiciaries, free media, checks and balances, open civil society, economic markets. Right? So when we use the term liberalism in that way, we're describing a fairly big tent, you might say, right? It includes Ronald Reagan on the right and Franklin Roosevelt on the left. I mean, the version of liberalism I'm defending is very much a kind of left liberalism in the style of FDR. But so important to note that that's what we'll be talking about when we use the term liberalism.
Right, and your book is called Freedom from All, not freedom. That was a Freudian error. Freedom for all, not freedom from all. But freedom, in the way you presented it, it's the apple pie word, or the idea of the apple pie in America. Who's against? If you had anyone, even Trump wouldn't have the nerve to say he's against freedom. So it's freedom from or freedom to. There's the libertarian definition of freedom. There's the left liberal definition. There's the conservative definition associated with freedom from the state. So is that even obviously for you, freedom is an important word because it's the title of your book, Freedom for All. But is that a helpful word because it's so slippery and meaningless?
That's a great question. Let me just say two things about that. First, it's precisely because freedom is so ubiquitous in our political culture and has such a kind of and because Americans are so deeply attached to it, that it is really important for people on the left and for liberals in particular in this moment to contest that term, own that term, and refuse to cede that term to the other side. All right. So you're right that there's a morass surrounding the term freedom. People use it in all kinds of different ways. Part of the reason for that is that it matters so much politically. I mean, as a rhetorical matter, those people who've managed to sort of win the conceptual struggle and the rhetorical struggle for the term freedom tend to win political arguments in this country. So I think it's really important that we be focused on it. Now, to come back to what you said before, yeah, look, I mean, the right has unfortunately gotten the upper hand, I think, in this, in our debates over freedom over the last several decades, really since 1980 or so. The conception of freedom that's often invoked on the right, as you say, is a kind of libertarian or negative conception of freedom, which really emphasizes, look, the absence of interference in our lives, right? We're free to the extent that no one is impinging on us, and in particular, government is not interfering with us, coercing us against our will. This is an idea of freedom that underwrites a certain vision of politics, right? And it's a vision that celebrates fewer regulations, lower taxes, less spending on public goods, right? The less government there is in your life, the freer you are in this sense.
But
right?
Isn't that yesterday's war, Alex? I mean,
why would you say that?
That definition of freedom, the Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan definition, in a clearly an increasingly post-neoliberal age. What's interesting about the furious minds currently on the right in America is that they are reintroducing the state, nationalism, and the MAGA movement. I mean, the very idea of a MAGA new right, a Make America Great Again new right, is a reinvention of the state. So, for better or worse, the MAGA movement has left the Barry Goldwater station, the Ronald Reagan station, and is reinventing itself. And isn't the challenge for the left to stop fighting yesterday's war and going back? You've already mentioned FDR, and I'm sure we'll come back to him. Leave the New Deal, leave all the arguments that have been made over the last 50 years, and begin to rethink a left liberalism for a MAGA age.
Yeah, great. I mean, these are really good challenges. I would disagree with you on a couple of points. So first, you may recall that when Elon Musk, wielded his infamous chainsaw on stage, that chainsaw was emblazoned with the words "Long live freedom," right? As he was, and like slicing through not just public bureaucracy, but entitlement programs, right? So the kind, I actually think that the people in power right now are this weird ideological amalgam of neoliberalism on steroids on the one hand, right? What the pro-business, deregulation, almost everything they've done around labor rights, for example, is straight out of the neoliberal playbook. Antitrust, you name it, right? This is so there's that ideological element of what's going on, and it's important not to lose sight of that as we focus on, and we rightly focus also on some of these Catholic conservatives, some of these nationalist conservatives who are also contributing some of the ideological thrust of the MAGA movement. But I definitely think, we think about the sort of outright war on environmental regulation, on public health regulation, right? This is all done in service of a certain conception of freedom, and that is get government off your back and slash public entitlement programs and let people sort of do as they please with minimal interference in their lives, right? And this has always seemed to me.
That's the old argument, Alex. You've been making, not you personally, but the left has been making that argument for 50 years, and they've been losing the argument mostly for 50 years. You talked about Musk's chainsaw, of course. I think he was on stage with Javier Milei of the Argentine president or prime minister, president, I think. But Musk lost that argument. He got thrown out of government. He had a big row with Trump. Who knows if they're even talking anymore? A lot of it, of course, is orchestrated and performative and all the rest of it. But the idea somehow that this is the old world of cutting government, of making poor people poorer, it's not borne out. In fact, it's poor Americans in many ways, certainly poor rural Americans, who are supporting Trump. And most of the opposition to this, again, not for better, I'm not suggesting it's a bad or a good thing, it's just a reality, is coming from New York City and from Washington, D.C., and where I am in San Francisco and Los Angeles. So it's the global elites who are most against Trump. And it's a new world, isn't it? To fall back on the idea these are just government asset strippers is wrong.
Great. Well, so I would not say these are just government asset strippers, but I think there is a very important and I might even say dominant element in when you look at the sort of governing choices being made by Republican elites right now that still hews to that line. Of course, it's more complicated than that. Of course, you now have also, as Laura Field is discussing, these really different ideological currents that are not centered on personal liberty, that are in fact centered on a rejection of the idea of a politics, a liberal politics with freedom at its core. Right?
Even democracy. When you listen to some of the odd things that Peter Thiel's talking about, it's back to a kind of reactionary medieval Christianity, talk of antichrists and all sorts of other odd things.
Yeah, right. And it's hardly, Peter Thiel is hardly alone, right? You were talking the other day about Adrian Vermeule, about the likes of Patrick Leahy,
Laura Field,
Yoram Hazony, others, Rod Dreher, right? A lot of these intellectuals envision, these right-wing intellectuals envision a kind of reinvigoration of the religious state, really, right? So there's a profound current of anti-liberalism at the core. That's playing an important role as well, and I certainly wouldn't deny that.
So let's get to the core of your argument. So clearly there is a crisis on the left in America. However one interprets that crisis, it exists. Left liberals are not reaching Americans. They need to reinvent themselves, their ideas, their ideology, maybe their leaders. What has happened over the last 50 years, Alex, in your view? I know you feel that there have been some profound changes to America over the last 40 to 50 years. What has happened, and why haven't liberals adapted accordingly?
And when you say liberals there, you mean
I mean, we're talking about the people you're writing for, the people who sympathize with the liberal society that you write in favor of in your new book.
Yeah. Well, that's a really big, complicated question, and has to do. There's a lot of different things that this.
Well, give me two or three.
Good. Well, so, I mean, certainly when you look at the last 45, 50 years in this country, you can't tell the story of what's happened without telling the story of dramatic economic changes that have benefited the wealthiest and that have been difficult and imposed real hardships on the majority, right? So, I mean, political scientists, when they think about the origins of the anger, the fury that you were asking about just a moment ago, disagree actually right now, right? There's a number of different explanations on offer. Some of them have to do with demographic change, the rising anxiety in this country of white Christians in particular who fear being displaced, right? Rising anxiety about immigration, et cetera. There are explanations that center on technological change, the advent of the internet, social media, which have empowered people on the periphery to exercise, to amass influence and destabilize the center. But many of political scientists also emphasize the rising inequalities and what some of them now call late stage neoliberalism, which has produced tremendous economic insecurity, not just among the poorest of Americans, declining economic opportunity, flatlining real wages over time, and just
okay. So I take your point, and then let's get back to the MAGA movement. I mean, Trump's response to that, and he talks, I think, much more openly about it than many people on the left, certainly on the center left. He talks much more openly about it, I think, even in the last election than Harris. Trump's response to that is an economic nationalism of tariffs and of treating the rest of the world as if it's an enemy. Obviously, this is not something that you're arguing for in the book. What are you suggesting in that context that liberals need to do to counter Trump's popularity with poor Americans, especially poor white Americans?
Right. I mean, honestly, I think what we need, and I'm hardly alone in calling for this, is a left populism that speaks directly to the economic suffering of working class people, and that is not shy about naming who our opponents are in this, which is to say the plutocrats who have helped bring this society about, this kind of late stage neoliberal society about, right? And it would be a politics centered on a raft of proposals designed to reinvigorate organized labor, for example, designed to strengthen the social safety net, designed to expand healthcare, designed to make investments in poor communities that'll make a difference in people's lives, right? But bound up with a narrative that's about honestly sticking it to economic elites.
What about innovation? I mean, this debate is going on all the time now, not just in the left, the center left. Mamdani, of course, has triggered perhaps even a crisis within the Democratic Party, according to the Post, which is a liberal newspaper. Democrats are nervous about what they call a democratic socialist, whatever that means. So what are you basically just arguing for in the book for a Mamdani style democratic socialism? Gives free housing, free busing, free stores to poorer Americans. Is that the argument in the book, or one of the arguments?
I don't use the term socialism to describe my view. So no, I would position myself. I mean, you had Cass Sunstein on a while ago talking about his book, and one of the things he and I agree about is in admiring, for example, Franklin Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights. Right. So, I mean, I think it's very important for left liberals in this society to locate their lineage not within the socialist tradition, which has never been successful in attracting widespread support among American voters, right, and nor even among broad sections of the white working class, but rather in this homegrown tradition of what I call radical liberalism that goes all the way back to Tom Paine writing around the American founding, to early labor activists and abolitionists and early feminists, and then the civil rights activists, and before that, like the FDR coalition, right? So I do think, I mean, there are significant areas of overlap between a sort of democratic socialist politics and a left liberal politics in the style of FDR. But a lot depends on, again, we need to win this ideological struggle, and to do that, we need to be careful about the lineage that we choose to identify with.
I'm not sure, again, you say we, I'm not sure we do. I mean, Trump hasn't. I think he barely even is literate. He certainly doesn't know anything about American intellectual history, and yet he's managed to capture the commanding heights without, I mean, I think he occasionally referred to McKinley, but that's pretty much it. I mean, if you do it right, you do it well. And it doesn't matter whether you associate yourself with FDR or with early feminists or abolitionists. I'm not sure that's the case. It's interesting that you bring up Cass Sunstein and his book on liberalism and his appreciation for FDR's second commencement speech. Because I think that Sunstein's coming at this entirely differently from you. He's imagining liberalism as a big tent. And you're arguing the reverse, aren't you? You're suggesting, in a sense, I guess Sunstein's right, that it is a big tent, anyone who believes in individual rights and the legal state. But you're arguing that the only way for liberals to win back power is to narrow the tent. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say narrow the tent so much, but I would say, yeah, this. Look, and this comes back to something I was saying at the beginning. One of the worries I have about the tenor of the sort of defenses of liberalism, and this is not just about, people speaking out in the last 7-8 months since Trump took power, but it's also about the books and articles that have been published in defense of liberalism over the last decade or so, is that many of them have adopted a kind of defensive or reactive posture, right? There's this big worry, the rise of the authoritarian right, and liberalism is presented as a kind of antidote to that worry, a way of deflecting its dangers, a way of maintaining a sense of political normalcy, a way of liberals present themselves as sort of adults in the room in contrast to the irrationalism of the right. And I think that's, that message doesn't land well among people who are deeply dissatisfied with the American status quo, right? And so, we have to, in order to compete ideologically in this moment, we have to not just offer a kind of indictment of the populist right, but we also have to offer a clear and principled and I think quite ambitious vision of where we want to go, right? And that vision has to be joined to a real indictment of the American economy and the pre-Trump status quo, as unequal as it is, as
What do you mean,
alienating as it is.
What is the pre-Trump status quo? You mean the Bush's America?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, for it seems for many liberals that the object is to ride out this political storm as best we can and sort of preserve our institutions and our economic order, right? Which Trump is destabilizing. But so many people in this country were deeply dissatisfied, and with good reason, with that economic order, right? So we have to also be able to offer a vision of of a fairer, more inclusive society, a society that offers people dignity and a chance at meaningful economic opportunity, right? And we have to be able to articulate that much more clearly than many liberals are, who are focused on playing defense.
Yeah, I think that goes without saying, although I think one of the reasons they can't is perhaps because you can't. You've talked about rediscovering or re-embracing a populist left tradition, and you seem, Alex, in the way you presented, to cherry pick. You found all the best bits. So, you know, emancipation, Tom Paine, liberal feminist, blah, blah, blah. But the reality of left populism is it comes with warts and all. I mean, think of William Jennings Bryan, who ran for Democratic president 4 times, lost every time. He was a populist. He was also, in an odd way, a reactionary against global capitalism, against even the Enlightenment in his defense of religious values. So is one truth, for better or worse, about the left rediscovering its own populism is it's not going to thrill left liberals like yourself. It's gonna comprise stuff that you're not going to like very much.
I think that's undoubtedly true, and I think you know, one of the things. So I spent some time in the conclusion of the book, sort of thinking through as best I can, and I'm not a political strategist, what sorts of moves we ought to be making on the American left right now. And it's very clear, look, we need to, in order to win power, as in any democratic society, we have to build a broad coalition. And building a broad coalition is going to mean welcoming people into the coalition who have views that make us uncomfortable. Right? We have to, you know, we need to be able to make common cause, for example, with Catholic Latino voters who have fairly left ideas of social justice, but conservative ideas about abortion and certain other social issues. Right? We need to be able to make common cause with union and working class voters who've been alienated by the sort of elite flavor and exclusivity of what they perceive to be the sort of woke tenor of.
And I was going to use it. You beat me to it, Alex. Less woke, more.
I use that term with some trepidation, but yeah, right. I mean, and this is not to say that folks on the progressive left need to give up their own convictions or stop arguing for them, but rather it's about the sort of style in which they're articulated. Right? We have to stop practicing a kind of politics of purity, and have to start practicing a political strategy that's sort of rigorously calibrated to reach out to constituencies that, you know, I mean. We started with the anxiety that the right is sort of winning the ideological war. This administration is doing so much right now to alienate so many people, right? That even, you know, and we've seen shifts in the polls, and many of the folks who were not already in the MAGA coalition, who voted for him, falling away now.
But we've always had that ever since Trump 1 was in power. There've always been these articles every month in the New York Times and the Washington Post about, oh, Trump now has alienated his supporters. They're all angry. They no longer believe in him. And then every 2 or 4 years, they come back and vote for him.
Well, we have to do a better job of presenting a compelling alternative.
Okay, so what is that? I mean, coming back to FDR. FDR now, when you look back, I mean, we could hold our nose at some of the things he did. He was never willing, for example, to take on the southern segregationist wing of his own party. What, I take your point on woke, but most people now accept that. What do you think the Dems or the left Dems or the progressive Dems, what do they need to address that can resurrect a left populism that will really offend people? That ultimately is essential if they're to regain power and credibility in America.
Well, one thing they have to be willing to do, and this goes along with, and let me preface all this by saying, I'm a political theorist. I sit around teaching, Plato and Marx and
yeah, but you've thrown your hat into the ring with this.
I have, and I'm happy to. I'm not going to stay silent.
And I'm not presenting you as a strategist. If you were a strategist, I wouldn't have invited you on the show. They're boring, but I mean, you're interesting. So I take your point. But the strategists take their leads from the philosophers like yourself. I hope, maybe, ideally, anyway.
No, but I mean, look, one of the things I think the left and the Democratic Party in particular needs to be willing to do is to adopt positions that will deeply offend its donor class, right? And that includes much stronger views than they're often willing to take about organized labor and wealth taxes and expansions of public investment in schools and community colleges designed to create upward paths for folks. And a whole raft of other things. I mean, I defend.
Let me be clearer. What are you saying? That they should tell wealthy Americans that they have to pay 40, 50, 60% tax, that innovation shouldn't be rewarded? I mean, what's your point?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say innovation shouldn't be rewarded. I mean, the American economy in the 20th century was a very innovative economy, and yet our top marginal tax rates at certain points exceeded 80%, right? And I mean, so you can have those things. I think you can have high taxes and a policy and an economy that rewards innovation. But look, I defend a universal basic income in the book. I defend the nationalization of the fossil fuel industry. So I think we need to be willing to. I defend. I argue that we need to look very seriously at rethinking the way corporations are governed.
Why are those vote? I mean, I take your point. You're clearly on the left of the Democratic Party. You're probably beyond the left of the Democratic Party. But why are any of these vote winners? Why would? I mean, Americans. Poorer Americans in particular never seem to vote for this sort of stuff. When was the last time? I mean, FDR didn't run on these platforms. He didn't run on universal basic income. He didn't run on closing down corporations.
Yes, but he embraced a rhetoric that was self-consciously populist, that invited, as he put it, the enmity of the millionaire classes at the time. We'd say billionaire classes today, right? Look, I mean, if you look at polling data in this country over and over, and you look at Americans' attitudes about their economy and or about money and politics, I mean, people widespread discontent with the levels of inequality, the levels of corporate compensation, widespread discontent with the perception that money is just that our politics are awash in money, and that our political system is beholden to wealthy elites. Widespread discontent with what's perceived as waning economic opportunity in this country, right? All these young people who now don't believe that they're going to,
and yet they're voting for Trump because they like gambling online. And they like social media, and they don't want to shut this stuff down. What do you make of the arguments made by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson in Abundance, a best-selling book? It's not the best of books, but it's clearly struck a nerve. I'm assuming you think that Klein and Thompson are basically wrong, that the real challenge for progressives is getting government to work again and reinventing innovation.
Well, let me just, before I get to that, just to finish what we were saying a moment ago, I think that the polls show significant discontent with our economy and the profound inequalities that exist within it. And so what that and yes, I mean, people who are discontented with the status quo have been drawn to the Trump coalition because Trump is positioning himself as an agent of destructive change, radical change, shaking things up, right? The left has not, the Democratic candidates have been much less successful. I mean, Bernie's, almost successful campaign, which might well have defeated Trump in 2016, was an example of how this can be done, right? The left can seize on this discontent and translate it into a political coalition, I think. Anyway, sorry, coming back to abundance. Yeah, I'm of two minds about the abundance literature, because, I mean, on the one hand, I think, and there's right-wing Koch brothers style abundance, stuff, and there's the sort of left-leaning stuff, and I think of Ezra Klein among others. I've little sympathy for abundance when it's deployed in service of a kind of accelerated neoliberal deregulation agenda, right? But I think Ezra and others make some really powerful points. I think they're limited points, and the solutions they offer are only one piece of a much bigger puzzle. But yes, in the area of housing, and yes, in the area of climate infrastructure, we absolutely have this sort of crying need to be able to build things quickly. And we have, for various reasons, and I think they're not entirely right about how we got here, we've gotten ourselves into a situation in which building these things is really hard, right? We've got too many regulatory hurdles.
Right, we've done lots of
too many veto points. Yeah, exactly. Right. So look, I mean, climate change is I think the most egregious threat to human freedom that's going to unfold in our lifetimes. And so I take some of the abundance literature stuff very seriously. I mean, I think we need to pull out all the stops to enable
it's interesting, Alex, you bring up climate. I know your book suggests that, like many books, progressive books, that we're on the verge, we're risking some sort of climate environmental apocalypse. But as we speak, for example, Bill Gates, who's invested massive amounts of his fortunes in climate stuff, has made the claim that climate activists need to become more realistic, less apocalyptic. Is one of the problems, perhaps, with the left is that they fall into the apocalyptic trap, which is firstly very negative and dark and un-American, and secondly not right, and that it's actually innovation rather than regulation that can begin, at least together, to address these problems.
Yeah, again, great questions. I do think that we are ill-served by a certain kind of apocalyptic rhetoric, and I've seen this among my students. If you really think that this is an all or nothing moment, where if you don't make the needed interventions now, the game is up, then that you risk producing widespread resignation and a sort of sense of helplessness when the moment passes, right? And we have a climate denialist administration that's pulling down, right, all of the progress that was made under Biden, and that's unhelpful because I didn't see what Gates was saying, but I've certainly heard other climate activists say similar things.
Yeah, and we've done lots of shows on that.
Yeah, look. Right. So that there's a way in which the apocalyptic rhetoric can be unhelpful. I mean, it is not an all or nothing proposition, and there's still a lot of levers under our control. But then the second thing that you asked about was about innovation. I absolutely think that technological innovation is going to play a central and crucial role, and is currently playing a central and crucial role, right, in the transition to a clean energy infrastructure. And one of the few bits of good news that we have over the last year amid this unfolding mayhem in Washington is what's happening with renewable energy prices, right, and the continuing efficiencies that we're getting in solar and in wind. But you know what? If you look carefully at how that happened and how this energy transition is happening and has happened in places like Europe that are ahead of us, state investment, state subsidies, state incentives have played a very important role in helping unlock innovation. So public-private partnerships, absolutely, but I would want to emphasize the important role that that public institutions have to play in shepherding that transition.
Although one could argue, and maybe even some of the more odder Trump people might make the argument, that it's the Chinese model of state capitalism that's best on the environmental front as opposed to the European regulatory one. Let's end, Alex, on the performative quality. I mean, one of the things that came out of my conversation with Laura Field is that what the right has successfully done, and this is not something that can be quantified, is somehow captured the performative high ground. They figured out that whether it's a Teal, I mean, Teal's a rather a particularly odd character, but even someone like J.D. Vance, and certainly these social media figures like Bronze Age Pervert, they figured out how to perform in this new world. It is a new world. And I wonder what the left has to learn from. I mentioned William Jennings Bryan earlier, a very popular figure in turn of the 20th century America. The last great left populist seems to me to be Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. And I wonder what we can learn from RFK Jr. And I'm not suggesting that just because RFK Jr. is Bobby Kennedy's son, that there's some intrinsic connection. But RFK Jr. started on the left. I'm still not sure he's actually on the right. He's a rather odd character in his combination of environmentalism and conspiracy theory. But what can we learn perhaps from not just Bobby Kennedy, but RFK Jr. about a performative liberalism of the left that will be able to take on someone as brilliantly performative, whether one likes it or not, as Trump?
I'm not going to take that bait and try to draw lessons from RFK Jr. But I will say I'll introduce another name that you already did, and that is Zoran Mamdani. I mean, look, one of the big problems with the Democratic Party is that it's become a party run by folks who have been in politics for a very, very long time and are much older than the average American voter and do not have the kind of savvy that it takes to reach young voters, to master social media and this kind of performative element. I mean, the changing media landscape, right, creates opportunities, and someone like Mamdani has shown how left politicians can harness those opportunities, reaching voters directly through really snappy and innovative uses of TikTok and other platforms. So yeah, we need younger politicians, and we need also politicians who are not Ivy League educated lawyers, right? But who rather speak in the language that is more recognizably middle America, right? And we haven't found those leaders yet. I mean, the Democratic Party hasn't, and it has a real job ahead of it, leading into the midterms and then eventually 2028. But it's crucial that those leaders be cultivated, and that the Chuck Schumers of the world step aside and make room for them.
And not just the Chuck Schumers, the Kamala Harrises. The fact that Kamala Harris had the nerve to come out recently and suggest that she may run for president again. Yeah. I mean, I get always picking on this woman, but she's such a failed politician on every imaginable level that she would have the nerve to do something so absurd when she clearly isn't suited for office, and she clearly doesn't get anything about what's happening. What about Newsom? What's your take on him? Is he the old world or the new world, or a bit of both?
Yeah, I'd say a bit of both. I mean, he certainly has shown himself to be a savvy communicator in a way that the left really needs right poking fun relentlessly at the Trump administration, using his own kind of absurd rhetorical strategies against him. But Newsom as a California liberal is not exactly the figure that I would choose to lead the Democratic Party into 2028 for sure. I mean, I think. I'd much rather have someone like Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, I'm not sure she's very new. It may always be darkest just before daylight, whatever that phrase is. Maybe liberals are particularly pessimistic these days until someone comes along. Maybe it'll be Mandami. Maybe it'll be someone else. Maybe a little less New York, a little less associated with anti-Israel. But we shall see. An important conversation. This conversation now is essential, I think, on the left. And I think what Alex Zakaras has done in Freedom for All is really address it full on. So congratulations, Alex, on the new book. And as the 2028 election gets into gear, we'll have to have you back on to see who gets it and who doesn't. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thanks for everything you do to help bring scholarly voices to a wider audience. You're doing really valuable work, and I really appreciate it.